Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our CPD today. We're just going to give it a minute as everybody's joining the session today. But we're delighted to have you. And I suppose just to give you a flavour of what we have today, we are going to introduce you to the art of achieving goals as a leader for our CPD today. And our speakers are Bernard Jackman, former Irish international and Leinster rugby player, and private tennis coach to Sir Richard Branson and founder of GiveLearn, James Cluskey. And they're going to outline how leaders can create a clear sense of purpose for their teams, share examples of high-performing teams, and help you provide clarity for your team. And for those of you joining the session today who are looking to explore these topics in a little bit more detail, and while also enhancing your own leadership skills, we do have a workshop taking place on the 5th of March with James and Bernard, and we'll share the link in the chat during the session today if you'd like to find out a little bit more about that session. So before we get started, just want to give you a bit of background to our speakers today. So James has spent his life in high performance, and he's a former professional tennis player, ranked 145th in the world. And in his early career, he achieved a scholarship to play tennis at Louisiana State University, where he ranked third in the US. Upon retiring from tennis, James broke a Guinness World Record for the longest tennis match, playing for 60 hours continuously. And he wrote a book on goal setting called Advantage Lessons in Sport and Business to Achieve Your Goals. And as mentioned, he's a private tennis coach, I should say, to Sir Richard Branson on Necker Ireland, and is the founder of GiveLearn, which is a learning solution that runs classes and programs in the area of human skills development. And then we are joined by Bernard, who has played rugby in school and was persuaded by Warren Gatland to turn professional. He went on to play for Connacht, the Sale Sharks and Leinster, and internationally for Ireland before returning in 2010 due to a concussion industry. And Bernard remains an ambassador for Acquired Brain Injury Ireland, whose Mind Your Head campaign he strongly supports. So in 2011, Bernard published his autobiography, Blue Blood, before making his move into coaching at club level when he joined FC Grenoble on a consultancy basis. And he went full-time in 2012 and 2013 season and appointed head coach there. And he then moved to the Welsh team, the Dragons, for 18 months. And so since leaving coaching behind in 2018, Bernard has been working as a rugby pundit and columnist while rapidly building his own profile as a motivational speaker and high-performance consultant. So we are absolutely delighted to have James and Bernard with us today. Thank you very much. I think we're in for a very insightful session with you both. So I might just hand over to yourselves. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ruth, for that kind introduction, and thanks, Grace, in the background as well for all your help in getting things set up. So yeah, look, thanks everyone for joining for this hour-long session with myself and Bernard. I'm going to hand over to Bernard in a second, and Grace has kind of given me Ruth has given me a very good introduction. But just to say, my background is very much in the area of high performance. As she said, I got to 145 in the world in tennis. Really obsessed with high performance and kind of being at your best as an individual, as a team, as a leader. Met Bernard a couple of years ago through business. We became, we've done a lot of work together with different teams, with different organizations like Airbnb and lots of different organizations. I was fascinated by Bernard because he did a master's on correlation between high performance business and sport, which I thought was really, really interesting area to delve into. And I think we have similar interest in that kind of area. He's, passionate about high performance and about achieving goals and so on. And today, really, what he's going to look at, and I'll come in at different stages, but is really around achieving goals as a leader, and how leaders can create a sense of purpose for their teams, and then also obviously touching on what I just mentioned around high performing teams, and the similarities and commonalities between them, and also around giving clarity to your team as well. As Ruth said, we're doing a workshop on March 5th in person. If people want to delve deeper into the topic, and it's a half-day workshop where we can really go, deep as a group in person and have great conversations and exercises and so on in the space. So I'll talk about that a little bit towards the end of the session. But Bernard, I'm going to hand over to you to let you get started and open up.
Thanks, James, and thanks, Ruth and Grace, for the invitation. And allow myself and James have a part in your morning as you, I suppose, try and get better as a leader. And James is right. Yeah, I'm totally passionate about it. I was lucky enough to be a professional rugby player for 14 years, professional coach for 6 years in high performing environments and out of high performing environments. And that was the thing. It wasn't just one team that I played with wasn't high performing for a season or was. It can vary week to week. And the really good teams, the teams who have a really clear sense of what their purpose is, have clarity around what their plan is to get there, have a far better chance of being high performing on a consistent basis. And if you're high performing on a consistent basis, you've got an incredibly high chance of achieving your goal. So I suppose I like stories. That's how I learn. That's how I get a fuel or fire to do things. So I'm going to just tell you a couple of stories, I suppose, around my journey and my experience around high performance. So I suppose the first story is how I got here and why I'm here today. So I was very lucky to be a professional rugby player. When I left school, I went to study international marketing and Japanese in DCU. Plan was to go and try and sell beef to the Japanese from my dad, who's a cattle dealer. And rugby wasn't professional when I left school. And if it was, I wouldn't have been a professional rugby player. I wasn't an Irish schoolboy or Leinster schoolboy. So, but I, bit of a late developer. And just before I was supposed to go to Japan for my third year, rugby went professional, and Warren Gatland gave me a contract. And I never looked back. But when I retired in 2010, I went back and did a master's, as James said. And my thesis on the correlation between high performing behaviors and elite sport and business teams. And I'm not very academic. The idea of spending 2 or 3 months in the library, researching, didn't really float my boat. So I went traveling the world and visited as many high performing teams as I could get into. So I started off in Australia with Sydney Swans, who just won the AFL, the Aussie Rules competition. Ty Kennelly, the Kerryman got me in there. Then I went to the Melbourne Storm, who were the dominant rugby league team in the world. Then I went to the Canterbury Crusaders, the All Blacks. Then I went to Japan to Toyota. Then I went to America, to Amazon, Seattle, Google in San Francisco, the IMG Tennis Academy in Florida. I went to the Golden State Warriors, and then I went to London to Just Eat. We're a startup in an apartment in London. 3 co-founders. We're just trying to get it going. Then I went to Dyson. Then I went to Manchester United. Then I went to Rolex as part of my research. And what I tried to do was find out why these companies or why these teams were successful and why there was sustainable success. And I suppose what I want to do is try and share some of the little stories from that hopefully will fire or trigger something in your mind to think about how you lead and how your team try and achieve your goals. So probably the most impressive person I had come across on those trips was Alex Ferguson in Man United, because Man United at the time was 2010, so he retired in 2013. So he was 22 years into the job, which is incredible. The average football manager lasts, I don't know what it is now. It was 14 months the last time I checked. Probably getting even less. It's a really high stress, high pressure job, and obviously being at a top club like United, the pressure and the scrutiny is even higher. And I mean, I had a fan for my sins, so I followed that team that he oversaw for a long time, and they obviously brought great success. So I had 4 days in Carrington, which is where they train. And the thing about Ferguson is, it's very strict about who gets in, but if you get in, you have access to all areas. So I was allowed to be in the dressing room, I was allowed to be in the team meetings, I was allowed to be in the physio room, the gym, on the pitch, etc. And he only allows 2 people at a time, or you're only allowed 2 people at a time. So you had to get permission from him. No one else could get you in there. He oversaw it. So he had been in the job a long time, longer than anybody else. The next longest manager was Arsene Wenger, who did 22 years. But as I said, that's a rarity. And I was fascinated by how hungry, how driven the players were, how they held each other to account, how they pushed each other to be better, how they didn't tolerate low standards, as I said, in the gym, on the pitch, in team meetings. And yet they had pretty much achieved everything that you would want to achieve. So when I had my meeting with him on the Friday, so I saw him every day on the corridor, a bit of chit chat, but he and I knew I had a half an hour with him on Friday at 2 o'clock. So I said to myself, what am I going to ask for Alex Ferguson? So I just said to him, look, how do you motivate these people? And it wasn't just players, it was staff as well, male and female. Everybody was so focused on trying to get better. I said, how do you motivate these people who have everything? They've got millions in the bank. They've got all the medals they probably dreamed of as a kid, and they're never going to have to work again. Yes, when I watched them, when I observed them, I see people who, if you didn't know what they'd won, you thought they'd won nothing. And he said, look, I have a very simple story that I tell them at the very first day of preseason every year, and I repeat it at key moments during the year to make sure we understand the opportunity that's there for us. And the story goes, Sir Alex Ferguson grew up in a tough part of Glasgow, a place called Govan. Most of it's been knocked down now. And because if you grew up in that area, there was a very strong chance you're going to work in the shipbuilding industry, which, like Belfast, was a dominant part of Glasgow business and life back in the 60s, 70s. Fortunately, both Belfast and Glasgow aren't shipbuilding hubs anymore due to the cost of wages, etc. But back then, if you grew up on Hill Street, there was an 80-90% chance you were going to work in the shipbuilding industry because that's what people did in that area. And his own father was a docker in the shipyard, so he worked in the shipbuilding industry. And he tells a story that he was having dinner one evening with his mum and his dad, and he was with 13 or 14 years of age, and his father said, Alex, I was walking past the building site today, and I saw 3 men building a wall. And I said to the first man, I went in, a very inquisitive guy, I went in and I said to the first man, what do you do? And he said, I'm a bricklayer. Went to the second man, and he said, what do you do? And he said, I earn £4 a month. He said to the third man, what do you do? And he said, I'm building a building that in 50 years' time, my son or daughter will bring my grandson or granddaughter and say your grandfather built that. So he said, the room that we had our meeting on Wednesday, which basically is a team room for meetings. He said, I only ever want to have 22 chairs. If you had to count those chairs, there's 22 chairs in there, 2 11s. If I've got more than that fit, I send players on loan. I send players down to train with the academy or the reserves because I feel that's the maximum number of people in terms of playing staff that I want to have in a room or on the pitch at any given time. He said also on the side, you might notice there was 5 chairs for assistant coaches and there was 2 chairs for visitors. Okay, so that's how I like to run it. He said the very first day of preseason every year for the last 22 years, I have filled that room with my 22 players, my 5 coaches. If there's visitors there, great. And I've told them that story because in that room, there was 22 professional soccer players, like the bricklayers. In that room, some of those players earn 10,000 a week. I just heard about Marcus Rashford, who's United's striker. He's now earning 395,000 a week. A 5-year deal, 99 million over the course of his contract, and he's in trouble for staying out late and calling in sick. So the culture is obviously wrong at the moment. But back then, he said some of you guys earn 10,000 a week, 15,000 a week, etc., like the bricklayer who earns £4 a month. And some of you will come back to Old Trafford in 40, 50 years' time, or your sons or daughters will come back to Old Trafford with your grandchildren, and there'll be a myriad outside of you. Or at halftime on the big screens, they'll show clips of your era. And that's the opportunity you have. And he said he was very lucky. He sold that vision. He sold that sense of purpose, that clarity around the opportunity you have as a Man United footballer, a Man United physio, a Man United data analyst at that given time to actually leave your mark, to create a legacy, something that will last the test of time. And he said he hired or fired based around people who had the ability to buy into that sense of purpose. And he said he was very lucky. A group of people came out of the academy at the same time. A young bunch of players called the Class of '92. Most of them were from the local area, and they really bought into it. And he built a team around them. And then he hired players like Jaap Stam, Eric Cantona, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Roy Keane, Dennis Irwin, etc. He signed players like that who he felt, with the preparation he did, the research he did in terms of the interviews, the character references, speaking to other coaches, etc., that they were people who could buy into that. So he had a really simple, I suppose, way of selling that sense of purpose that was important. And again, the challenge as business leaders is do we know what it is? Have we discussed it? have we got a sense of purpose that people will buy into and people will follow? And do we regularly communicate that and make sure that that's still relevant to them? The other way of, I suppose, achieving your goals is to have a clearly defined sense of values and behaviors and what it means to be part of your team. And I didn't see a lot of sporting teams, a lot of corporates will have their values plastered all over the wall or in certain areas or the bottom of their emails, etc. There was no mention of those there, or sorry, no visual cues to it. So I said to him, well, how do you manage this group of people who obviously are highly driven, highly talented, high performers, which sometimes can be difficult to manage. That's the reality of it in terms of ego, etc. How do you motivate them? How do you manage them on a daily basis to make sure the culture stays strong? And he said, we've got 3 very simple values, and they haven't changed since the first day I walked into this place. And every year we do a check-in with our senior leaders to make sure they're still relevant, to make sure that they're still agreed upon by the group, not just my values. And I said, okay, well, what are they? And he said, well, the first one is never give up. Okay, so I'm not a technical coach, tactical coach per se. I hire people who could do that. And an interesting side note is that over Alex Ferguson's 25 years with Man United, he had 8 different assistant managers. And Arsene Wenger, who's a very successful manager and the second longest standing manager in English football history with 22 years, he only had 2. Okay, so it's not a slight on Arsene Wenger, but for me, it's an insight into Ferguson was always looking to add people to his management structure who could give the players an extra layer of detail, could maybe be a different voice to get that, I suppose, extra 1% out of them. So he said, never give up. He said, I'm not a tactical coach. My job is to basically make sure the behaviors are on point. And he said, all I ever do is look for examples of a Man United player or member of staff giving up, and I challenge that, or an example of them not giving up, and I praise that and reward that and highlight that in front of the group. And that manifested itself in a thing called Fergie time, which is basically what they called the fact that Man United scored more goals in injury time than any other team. And Ferguson used to say in post-match interviews that they lost. He never would say we lost the match. He just said we ran out of time. So this ideology that if they played another hour, another 2 hours, another 24 hours, that they would find a way to win. So again, it's that framing of that message to convince your team that they have that resilience, they have that never say die attitude. That is a core part of what they want to be. And he said other teams saw that. So when a fourth official put his board up or her board up saying 4 minutes of injury time, his own players used to rise, the crowd used to get excited, and the opposition used to back off. They used to sit back, and it actually helped United score more goals than anybody else. And I see that all the time in business. The companies and the teams that have a reputation for delivering on time, delivering on budget, being great communicators. That's what the market sees in them. That's what the opposition sees in them. It actually helps them win more business than any advertising campaign or any marketing campaign. So it's
Bernard, I was going to say on the business side of teams you visited, then what were I suppose in terms of Dyson and Toyota, these companies, what was
I think probably
a role.
So Toyota was fascinated by, obviously I studied Japanese, and the Japanese society, the Japanese culture is very different than the Western culture. Like I've had 5 different careers already. Some of us might have worked for 6 or 7 different teams over the course of our life, our companies. In Japan, if your mum or dad work for a company, there's a strong chance you want to work for them. And also, if you go into Toyota at 18, a big part of their purpose is to leave it at 64, 65, having not worked for anybody else. And they actually call themselves sometimes by their company name. So, I'll be a Toyota man, my wife would be a Toyota woman, etc. And that's not just for Toyota, that's for Nippon Steel, that's for Coca-Cola, it's for Sony, any of those big or small Japanese businesses. There's a big sense of that's part of who I am, is who I work for. And what that can create is a little bit of, I suppose, people staying in their lane, people not putting their hand up. And Toyota realized that back in the 70s, 80s, that one of the thing, the handbrakes for them for getting better was a lack of feedback, a lack of people willing to, I suppose, upset the current situation, to share their ideas, to really buy into what they're part of. And they introduced a thing called the Toyota Production System, TPS, and a lot of the Western manufacturing companies have gone to Toyota to see this. And how it basically works is, so that the company, the factory I visited was the one of two plants in Tokyo, the smaller one where the smallest car as far as big as SUVs were built. And basically 8,000 people work there, 4,000 people on shifts, so it's producing 24 hours a day. But because it's in Tokyo, they're actually caught for space. So it's not, it's a very compact factory that's over three stories rather than is just a massive scale in terms of taking up 3 or 4 kilometers. And effectively what happens is, in a conveyor belt, it's obviously highly mechanized, highly computerized. But the chassis starts off at the start of the conveyor belt, and on over 4.2 kilometer up, down, and around, it comes out at the other end, a car. But as I said, it's highly computerized, but there's people all the way along that conveyor belt doing what can be quite menial manual jobs over and over again. And it's obviously highly performance managed, so there's a certain target per hour of what you need to achieve to be able to keep the efficiency of the company up. So there's obviously fire and safety alarms all the way along that conveyor belt, but there's also a red cord that runs all the way along that at any given time, anybody along the conveyor belt can pull that cord. And if they pull that cord, a different type of alarm goes off and the conveyor belt stops for 15 minutes. So back then, every minute it was stopped it cost the company $44,000 US dollars. So it's not anything trivial to pull that cord. You kind of need to be pretty confident that the idea that you're going to come up with is going to actually help the company. And on average, it happens 2.4 times a year. But when it happens, the conveyor belt shuts down for 15 minutes, and people from all over the office, all over the factory, management, etc., come down and do a hot debrief for 15 minutes. Even if it's finished in 4 minutes, they commit that 15 minutes the conveyor belt's going to stop. And then over the following 2 weeks, they do further research, hold a lot of meetings to decide if that idea, that feedback is worth incorporating into the new processes to try and make the company better. So effectively, everybody in the company has the capacity to give feedback that will be listened to and acted upon. And when I say acted upon, doesn't mean it's integrated. It means it's analyzed, and the decision is then made, and the decision is communicated back, whether that's going to be useful or whether it's not something they're going to incorporate ever or in the short term, and explain why. And that empowerment, that ownership of effectively making Toyota one of the best automobile companies in the world is a really intrinsic part of why Toyota have actually higher staff retention rates than the others, the other big companies in Japan at the moment, because Japanese society is starting to change. The Generation Z aren't as loyal or don't necessarily want to be one company, men or women. So are starting to look around and jump around a little bit. But Toyota are leading the way in terms of their employee retention rate. And obviously, the cost of hiring, the cost of training, the lack of cohesion that the cohesion you lose when you're replacing staff does lose a competitive advantage. So that's something I thought was really interesting, given the societal issues or the culture that's there. James Dyson, obviously, thankfully he's a rugby fan, and he was the richest man in the UK. He was worth 20 billion just post COVID there, and he gave me a week of his time. And his story is really interesting in terms of the resilience that he showed at an early stage. It took him 5,127 attempts. 5,126 different prototypes before they actually arrived at the the starting prototype for the Dyson Hoover. But what I really found interesting about him was a lot of his senior leadership team are the same people who were there at the start. And when you speak to them about why they've stayed with Dyson, because they've had lots of offers to go to other companies. If you can hire someone who's been part of the creative team in Dyson, for example, you're going to get a lot of IP. Their reasoning is that he's someone, the psychological safety that he creates. Okay, so the ability to actually put your hand up and say, James, I don't agree with that. James, this isn't working. James, can we do that differently? Is very empowering. And they all feel that they're in an environment where their opinion matters, and there's a mutual respect there, and they want more of that. And I think that's what I've found, from being high performing teams, whether it's in business or sport, is that if people feel you care about them, if people feel that the environment is conducive to stretching yourself, you're all on CPD this morning. You're obviously interested in learning to be better as an individual, to be better as a team, and that's an incredibly important part of growth. It's an important part of actually enjoying your work, and it's an incredibly important part of teams that actually achieve their goals. Because when you have people who enjoy their work, when you have people who are have the feeling and the safety to be creative, to lead the way, to steer the future, it tends to create a much stronger sense of teamwork, a better culture, and better success. And as leaders, again, it's the ability to, I suppose, verbalize that, to sell that to your team, so they know that you have an environment that they have the safety, they have the opportunity to play a part in your future.
One of the things I think is really interesting from that piece, Bernard, and one thing that we had in the brief was around creating a clear sense of purpose. And sometimes I think in sport it's quite obvious, like Ireland are going into the Six Nations to win the Six Nations or win the World Cup. Or in business, then how do you, in terms of purpose, have you any tips around like a business kind of having that clear sense of purpose or creating that purpose? And like, we've spoken before, one thing that is related, I think, is around the culture piece that you spoke about at Red Bull with the Christian Horner and the Bolt. Sure. But just curious on that kind of area of purpose of between business and sport, and how you kind of navigate that.
Yeah, look, I think the best leaders that I've seen understand that they have to be salespeople, and that's not selling like a used car salesman or nothing wrong with that, but just like, it's not selling to be ruthlessly commercial. It's actually selling the purpose, the opportunity, the challenge of what's ahead and why it's important, and that's going to be unique for every team, for every business. But it's trying to get people excited to be on the journey, and it's way easier. And look, I've worked for Reuters, I've worked for Gartner, I worked in an office environment, and I know sometimes it's difficult to get excited about it like you would for your hobby or your sport, but it can be done. And I suppose the best leaders I've seen have thought about why it's important, why what we're doing is important, why we need to commit to the next month, whether it's in sales, building a pipeline, whether it's in governance, changing the government's organization, the governance that the team are going to be faced with, whether it's legislation or whatever's ahead of us, trying to basically explain that and communicate why that's important. And a big thing, James, is teaming and trying to use something else to get people excited, or on a journey to, I suppose, execute what's actually in front of them. So I suppose the Red Bull analogy is
Can I just, sorry, Bernard, can I come in on one thing there before you, and then come back to the Red Bull thing? So for people that came on late, so my background is tennis, and I coach Richard Branson tennis. So I'd go to Necker a lot and work with him, and so I've done it for the last number of years. And one of the people that was when I did a month with him last time, one of the people who was on the island, she used to work as an air hostess for Virgin, and they had three planes at the start, two planes, and they were going up against British Airways, and um, it was a big challenge. And what she said to me, it's something that I kind of remembered. She said to me, "Oh, how are you getting on with Richard?" And I said, "Oh, great. He's really nice and friendly and all that sort of stuff." And she said, in the early days of Virgin, she said, they didn't pay very well, but Richard would get on the airplane and he'd have his notebook in his back pocket. He'd take the notebook out and he'd say, what can we do to get better? How can we improve? And it's kind of back to your psychological safety piece of like making people feel like there's a purpose, that they're like, even though they don't have the biggest role within the company, or but making them feel a part of something. So for me, one of the things that always stands out with him is he's always asking questions around, how can we do things better, but always making you also feel a part of things as well. So just when you mentioned that, I just wanted to kind of use that story. But yeah,
Yeah.
I'd love to transition to the Red Bull.
Yeah, no, and like that's it. Like you're constantly selling what's important, what's ahead of us. But like this, if you want to sell to people, you need to understand them, and they need to respect you, and you need to know, why they are the way they are and what motivates them. So it's constantly that interpersonal skills and ability to communicate it, and giving people clarity. I think clarity gives massive confidence. If you know what's ahead of you, what the challenges are, what the opportunities are, and you communicate those well, and everyone's clear of their role in that, there's a far better chance of achieving your goals. And I suppose the Red Bull one was interesting. And so every year I go away somewhere different. And I went to, I don't feel like me, but I watched Drive to Survive. So I got a little bit back into Formula One, and I had an opportunity to go visit Red Bull's factory in Milton Keynes. And it was the season that Red Bull ended up neck and neck with Mercedes. So it was season 5 of Drive to Survive, but it started season. But Red Bull had a massive problem with employee retention. So they were losing 32% of their staff on a yearly basis. And even though they're permanent staff in probably, I think 60% of the employees, and the other 40 were contractors. Even if you're permanent, it ran season to season rather than ran. You don't go to Red Bull and say, I'm going to be here forever. It's just the reality was, at the end of every season, other companies come in and try and poach you, or you go look for opportunities elsewhere in Formula One or in different sports or in different businesses. So they were losing a lot of staff, and the CEO admitted himself, Christian Horner, that it wasn't really a big concern of his, because he had a big budget, a big brand, sexy business, and when they went to recruit, they could always get really good candidates. But the feedback from his senior leaders were, yeah, we are getting really good people, but by the time we train them up, by the time we understand them, by the time they understand us, by the time they understand how we do things around here, we're actually losing ground. So we had good people that we weren't able to keep, and if we had been able to keep them, the cohesion and the benefits of cohesion would have been far greater than the chopping and changing that was happening. So anyway, Red Bull don't make anything as such. They're just a brilliant marketing team, and they sent their content creation team into Red Bull, into the factory in Milton Keynes for 3 weeks. There were 7 of them, and their job was to find content that would go viral to help market Red Bull, and use the power of Formula One. And there's a video on YouTube called The Life of a Bolt, and I'd ask you to look it up later on. It's only 2 minutes long, and it went viral. And effectively what happened was, the youngest member of that content creation team is a young German digital marketer. And he saw this bolt being designed on a CAD drawing, okay, on a computer. And the person designing it did the big detail on it. Took a long time, and then they printed off the drawings and the planning, and it was brought into a forge on site, because they tried to make as much of the parts as they could on site. And then it was made in a forge. It was polished. It was prepared perfectly, serial number put on it, put into a bag, brought down to the garage, put into a drawer, and then they do this time-lapse video. So three months later, the bolt is taken out by a mechanic, takes off the serial number, puts it into the car drives off. Okay, that's the ad. But effectively, the story is that the centerpiece of a Formula One car, despite the fact that you're allowed to spend 120 million a year on this car, is a piece of steel that holds the car together. So it was launched, went viral. They got great feedback from it, really creative, etc. But on the factory floor, people started to talk about it. And at the next management meeting, and under any other business, some of the senior leaders fed back to Christian Horner that this video actually at the water cooler, in the canteen, on the shop floor, was being talked about as how they feel about working for Red Bull. That even if I work in logistics, if I work in HR, if I work in catering, if I work in reception, I kind of feel that I have a role to play in keeping the car together, even though I'm not at the track. I don't have 500,000 Instagram followers, etc. But they do feel that, but they actually felt that Christian and some of the other senior leadership team don't recognize the important role that they play in terms of keeping that car together. So in fairness, he said, leave it with me. And then for the next kickoff, which was actually the year that I was there. So when I say kickoff, the new season start, he sent out an email and he gave the agenda for the day, and the 9 o'clock briefing from Christian. Between 9:15 and 10 o'clock, he was going to introduce new members of staff, etc. 10 to 12, they're going to break out into their teams, do a little bit of a workshop, come back for lunch at 12, and then he asked people at 2 o'clock to come back into the auditorium because they have a massive big theatre space for the final part of the day. And at the bottom, he said, please bring something that's important to you that you're willing to give up, and didn't explain it. So his feedback since has been that he made a mess of it. So he should have explained it better. So at 2 o'clock, he plays the Life of Volt video to the staff, and he said, look, I know a lot of people here feel that this symbolizes the impact they have in this company, and I know we haven't done a great job of actually recognizing that. I know that maybe we don't know your name, or maybe we don't show enough appreciation of what you do, but that's going to change. So over the course of the rest of the evening, there's going to be a barbecue, a bonfire, and some drinks. Spend time together, getting to know each other. Please put the item I've asked you to bring into the fire. Okay. Didn't explain why, and that's what he said his learning from it was he didn't explain properly what his idea was, and he didn't sell it properly. So he reckons about 20% of the people actually put something into the fire. Okay. And that could be a photograph, that could be a letter, that could be an item of clothing, whatever they wanted to bring in. But 3 days later, when the fire had gone out and the ashes had cooled down, somebody from the factory was sent to that fire pit to get the ashes, to get a sample of the ashes. The ashes were brought into the forge, and he asked the steel mason to incorporate those ashes into a replica bolt. Okay, so the bolt that was in the video, same size, same design, etc. But instead of a serial number at the top of the bolt, to put the season 22-23 into it. Okay, on top of it. Okay, so obviously word went around the factory. Jesus, Horners after getting ashes out of the fire and after bringing it to the forge. So when the bolt was made, he called another meeting with everybody and said, look, I didn't explain properly what I wanted to do, but basically we haven't appreciated you as a company, as a team, and things are going to change. There was a big divide between the 48 people who go to the track every week for the 21 races and the people who are left behind, to such an extent that some of the people didn't even watch the race on a Saturday or weren't interested in on Sunday in how the qualifying on Saturday, the race on Sunday. So he said, from now on, things are going to change. So when we're in Abu Dhabi or Melbourne, the factory's going to open up. Okay, caterers, you're going to come in, and we're going to bring outside caterers in. So we cook for you for once. Bring your kids, bring your mom and dad. There's going to be face painting. There's going to be lots of different activities around the day to make it more enjoyable. And then I want all of you to feel that you can support our team competing together. It's not compulsory. If you want to watch it at home, if you don't want to watch it, that's okay. But we want to make it a better environment and have everybody as part of this journey to try and be the best Formula One team in the world. also, he said, we're going to do something a little bit differently as well. So there had been a bit of criticism that there wasn't any feedback. You know, what happens on a Sunday? It's only the people at the track who actually broke down the race. It was never fed back to HQ. So 3 hours after the checkered flag, whether we're in Las Vegas or whether we're in Silverstone, we're going to send out a Zoom link, okay? And everybody at the track will be back in the motorhome 3 hours afterwards. We'll connect with you either in Milton Keynes in our factory, or if you're home at that stage or you never came, you have the connection, and I will debrief the race. I will explain what happened, and what we did well, what we didn't do well, and what are the big work-ons for next week, and what we're going to do differently. But also we're going to award the Bolt of the Week award. Who was the member of our company or organization that held the car together this week? Okay. And I want you to give me nominations through your leaders every week of the season, so that we actually can make a really fair decision around who has held Red Bull together, who has held the car together, metaphorically, but who actually is just someone that you can rely on. And in your team, in your teams, in your company, in your organizations, you will have those bolts. You know, you will have those bolts there, people that you can rely on. Maybe you're the bolt, you know, but do you do enough to recognize that, to champion that? And that's only a symbol. The bolt is a symbol of something that was kind of came from the shop floor to them, and they've used to create a better sense of teamwork. This year, Red Bull have broken all records. Okay. And when they did this exercise last off season, he reckons nearly 80% of people put something that was important to them into the fire because they want to be part of this. They want to be part of a team who are incredibly well connected and are connected around values that aren't about talent. So Max Verstappen, the star driver, he's won the Bolt of the Week award twice. And he said winning it meant more to him than winning a race. Financially, it didn't, but it meant that people in his company, people in his team recognized that he did something that week that, I suppose, cared for others, cared for the bigger picture. And the successful teams that I've seen have lots of bolts. You know, they have, if you're using a Tour de France analogy or racing analogy, domestiques, people who break the wind. You know, if you're using the Mount Everest analogy, Sherpas, you know, people who get up in the middle of the night and carry the oxygen and the water further up the mountain to help the people who are trying to create history. They're the ones. But as a leader, do you place that value, that behavior as being important? Sometimes we can, I suppose, champion the great salesperson or the person who is unbelievable at getting a new IT system in place, etc. And they're all really important. But the best teams that I've seen who have success on a sustainable basis champion the old-fashioned behaviors around respect, honesty, teamwork, sacrifice for each other, caringness, etc. So that's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. But if Red Bull, who have unlimited resources, can get the best engine, the best wheels, the best gearbox, etc., have tapped into that, is it something as a leader that you could look at as part of your ability to create a stronger sense of purpose for your team? And I've seen it being adapted in lots of corporate teams now. Maybe not that well on an overall. It's very difficult for a multinational to do it, but in companies that are a little bit smaller or teams that are a little bit smaller, their own subcultures or cultures, they talk about this and they use, as I said, rituals, symbols, etc., storytelling to make it more exciting, and to, I suppose, champion really strong behaviors to help them achieve what the overall goal is.
Yeah, and Bernard, I find that story fascinating. And the follow up to that I wanted to ask you is around I suppose, being in a bad culture or a bad environment. How do you kind of change that and I'm thinking now, going back to your playing career, and you talked to me before around the evolution of say Leinster, for example, of like a not as professional environment to a professional environment, or just that culture that was that evolved and created. How did that kind of change, and how did that come about?
Yeah, I think I'm really interested in this because I've seen teams who have loads of talent fail, and I've been part of teams who had plenty of talent, not my talent, but other people's talent, fail. And I think the biggest shift is we used to think that just goals would drive us, and it can drive certain individuals. Some individuals are unbelievably goal focused, and if you set them a target and they'll chase that, and that's amazing. But in general, I think when you go more than 5 people, it's unlikely that you're going to have the majority who are able to just get a goal and chase it. So that was the big shift in Leinster. We used to be very goal focused to be the first team to win a European Cup, and then actually we realized that would come if we got the fundamentals, the foundation stones in place. And the foundation stone at the core of it is that psychological safety and feeling part of it, feeling that you can be yourself. And the leaders will either create a culture where that's common, or it's accept that feeling of being able to be yourself. And Andy Farrell is probably the most famous example in rugby of someone who embraces that. And it took him a while. It took him a while to get to that stage where people genuinely felt they could be themselves and be vulnerable, be funny, be awkward, whatever it is that makes up that individual. It takes a while. So that psychological safety piece is the foundation stone of a successful culture. And then when you get that, you actually get higher levels of trust. Okay, so you start to trust each other. And then you get, when you have strong levels of trust, you can actually hold people to account and each other to account. And then you get the performance, and then you'll get the results. So going back to my experience in Leinster was, we just started to spend some time trying to understand each other first, and why we were here, and what we want to get out of our careers, what we want to get out of life post that career, our family aspirations, etc., and talking about those. And then we started to build a little bit more trust. And then, as I said, then you could actually start to challenge each other in the right way. And then you get the performance. So that's the hard part in the corporate world. But it isn't, because the sporting world, the dressing room has changed as well. So people used to say, "Oh, you can't say what you said in the dressing room in the corporate world." You actually can't say it in the dressing room anymore either. It's effectively just good behaviors, and a strong culture should be the same, whether it's sport, business, military, arts. It should have the same kind of core values, and that's where I think there's been a huge amount more understanding, and that's what smart leaders really tap into. The role they play in creating the right environment to allow people thrive, and understanding that once they get that right, and they have a good plan and they have clarity around what's needed, the results will come.
Very good, yeah. And I'm looking just at in terms of what we'd set out at the start of the session, and in the brief around, creating a clear sense of purpose for their team, how leaders can create a clear sense of purpose for their teams. Example of high performing teams. So you've given some examples in terms of business and sport, giving clarity to your team. I think one final question for me, and if anyone wants to just ask a question just to finish up, but one final question for me is around, you obviously play for a lot of different managers and business, in businesses you work, so it doesn't have to just be sport, but like obviously people probably know the sports people more, and you work very closely with people like Warren Gatland as well. Like, what's the biggest things you would take away from a couple of those people, or is there anything that people could take back into business life?
Yeah, I think be yourself. You know what I mean? Like, so Michael Cheika, for example, was a highly volatile manager, and while probably he had to taper back a little bit on that, we got the sense that it was for the right reasons. He just wanted us to be better. He wanted us to succeed in our goals, and he was consistent in that. That's how he was. Warren Gatland had a gift for having a really good, strong sense of his gut feeling and following that, even if it wasn't a popular choice or it may open up scrutiny from outside. But that was his way of leading, was to try and always have a feel of how the group was and adapt to that. Other managers or leaders that I've worked with, unbelievably strong technically, so I suppose you build up a relation with them because you know if you go to them with a question or a problem, they'll probably have the solution, and that's really powerful as well. So like the thing is, I would say is, you know, read books, do webinars, attend CPD, have coffees, do your courses. You know,
Come to me in your course.
no, of course, yeah, absolutely. Well, we
No,
got to be a
joking.
salesman, but no, but do all those things, but only take the little bits that are kind of that are aligned to how you are as a person. You know what I mean? Like I think the best leaders I've seen, they're always evolving, but they're consistent, and it's along the same. You know, they're going north rather than going north one day, south the next day, east the next day. That for me, that confused me, and that made us that made the environment inconsistent, and for me that affected performance. So when I had clarity around what was ahead of us, but also the manner in which our leaders were going to behave, it didn't have to be the same every day, and I understand that, but as long as they weren't chopping and changing in terms of what's important too much, I think then it's actually exciting to work with different leaders and different personalities, and it's more interesting. And the ones I said, the in business or sport, they've kind of they've had consistency of what's important to them, and they don't veer too far away from that. So you know if you're part of that team, what's important, you know, and I enjoy that kind of environment, to be fair.
And there is a question in there, just Bernard, I've seen. So from someone, how can you build a strategy for a team to be consistent performers? How can you find if the strategy falls out, not working?
Yeah, I think we all need you need to have measurables that, you know, are going to give you regular check-ins around how you're tracking, and I think again, some of us love those. Other people I've worked with aren't that bothered as long as the end result is there. But I think consistent communication, you know, consistent feedback is something that can help people stay on task, and help deliver on those strategies. So I don't think you can over communicate. I think sometimes we think because we've said something at the start of the year in Q1, everyone remembers it. But I think constantly communicating where we're at, what's ahead of us, and why it's important. Those for me are key parts of successful leaders that I've witnessed.
Right. And just to thank Bernard, really fascinating, and just to say, so Grace shared in the chat box there. So on March 5th, 9 a.m. At SCSI, myself and Bernard are going to run a half-day workshop. The topic is around achieving goals as a leader, and it's all around transformational leadership, getting to and staying on top, and then talking more around building a sustainable high-performance culture. So I think in essence, and Bernard, you can come in if I'm wrong on this, but it's kind of going more in depth on what we've spoken about. It'll be an interactive workshop, and do you want to add anything on it? Or?
No, yeah, absolutely. Today was just basically to try and tell a few stories to get you interested in your own leadership journey, and obviously the transformational leadership will be, you know, much more relevant, much more in depth. And again, it won't be just me talking or you talking, James. It'll be very interactive, using some proven processes we've used in the past to help people understand a little bit more about, I suppose, what's their core values around leadership and how they can actually bring people along the journey with them.
Right. Well,
and thank you both for joining the session today. And Bernard, I think just pulling out, there's a couple of more questions that I have here from attendees, picking up on some of the commonalities that you were saying kind of across your experiences in business and sport. It seems to be communication, the sense of values, visual clues, reminding people of what they, you know, have signed up to do. So it's front and center, but also kind of the framing of the message. I think one of to take an analogy from what you were saying of your example with Red Bull, thinking of that that bolt that's been made. Really, it's a sum of its parts. And if we think of the leader as the sum of the parts of the teams that they're kind of bringing on together, which I think is a nice tie into what we'll be able to do as part of that expanded session with our masterclass on the 5th of March as well. So thanks for joining them up as well. We had one more question just before we let you go and everyone heads off. Do you see any common characteristics across high performance leaders with those that you've worked with? Or is it more, I suppose, in attitudes and behaviors?
Yeah, I think the big ones for me would be sense of purpose. They know where they want to go, and the type of people that they need with them. Resilience. They've nearly all, I'd say actually have all had big setbacks, big challenges. And that's something we don't see when we see the multimillionaire or the superstar. We just see the success. And they generally have a love of people. They generally have a love of people, and they're no one's fools. You know, if you lose trust, you lose trust. They can be quite ruthless, but they enjoy bringing other people along on the journey with them. They'd be the three big ones for me.
Great, thank you.
And last question, Bernard, prediction for Friday.
Unfortunately, I wrote a piece for, I have a column in Sunday Independent. So I think yesterday my finishing order for the Six Nations was France, Ireland, England, Scotland, Italy, Wales. So that will change massively if we win Friday night. But I think it's a big ask.
This is being recorded.
I know. It was in print yesterday, so I can't change it. I'd love to be able to say, oh, Ireland today and then England tomorrow. I'll be right somewhere, but no, unfortunately, I think Ireland finished second, and France is Six Nations to lose.
Brilliant.
Great. Well, thank you both again for joining us today, and for everyone who logged in for a session with you both. And we look forward to having you here in person in Merrion Square at the start of March. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Thanks, Bernard. Thanks.